You'll have to kill me before I stop hunting you down like a filthy fang fish.
12 unusual but brilliant vampire movies, hidden gems of this genre. Vampires exist in every folklore in the world, and various mythologies have given them different shapes and sizes. Such an omnipresent creature was never destined to go unnoticed by filmmakers. Almost a century ago, in 1922, F.W. Murnau made one of the earliest vampire films called Nosferatu, and since then, vampires have been a staple in every era of filmmaking. They're probably as old as films themselves. But when countless films center on the same subject, they run the risk of becoming monotonous and repetitive. So we have compiled a list of vampire films which can be called hidden gems. These unusual pictures are actually just like vampires themselves, waiting patiently to scare the next viewer. These movies are not your typical vampire films, each feeling unique in their story, theme, and cinematization. Fasten your seatbelts or just get comfortable under your blankets because this one's going to be a little bit scary. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The Hunger, 1983. Miriam Blaylock has lived for more than 2,000 years, consistently drinking the blood of young men, promising them eternal life as her vampire lovers. What she doesn't reveal is that eternal life doesn't mean eternal youth. Her current vampire boyfriend is a Frenchman named John from the 18th century. By day, Miriam and John pose as a rich couple who teach music and live in a grand house. As the sun goes down, they visit a local New York bar to pick up youngsters whom they take home, slitting their throats and drinking their blood. When John undergoes a heavily accelerated aging process, aging years in a matter of days, he recalls the half-truth that Miriam had told him. John visits Dr. Sarah Roberts, who's a specialist in the social and biological aspects of aging. As John gets fragile and weak, Miriam puts his undead body in a coffin with other coffins containing lovers from ages unknown. Sarah and Miriam build a sexual relationship, and Miriam targets her as the next companion. This is one bloodthirsty love triangle that we don't want to be a part of. Directed by Tony Scott, the brother of Ridley Scott, yes, the same one, this film is stylish, erotic, visually rich, and has a perverse sense of appeal. How many vampire films have we seen with undertones of lesbianism or love triangles? Back in the 80s, when exploitation films and unreasonable gore was every horror hound's bread and butter, The Hunger feels like a breath of fresh air, distinguishing between gore and fear. However, the climax could have played out better, as it did in the book of the same name by Whitley Strieber, from which the film was adapted. We believe it's a unique film, blending the politics of love with eroticism, deception, and twisted vampirism.
All that you look for. Am I not all that you thought I would be?
Night Flyer, 1997. Richard Dees is a cynical tabloid paparazzo working for Inside View. When his editor-in-chief Merton Morrison brings him the story of an unusual murder in an airfield, Richard discards the story and Merton appoints another journalist, Catherine Blair, to the case. Merton tells her that the body was found devoid of blood and seems like the work of a vampire. Catherine starts working on the story and soon similar murders crop up in and around the airfields. This attracts Richard's attention and he competes with Catherine to solve the case, with the two of them eventually working together. However, when her help is no longer needed, he abandons her and moves forward on his own. He discovers an airplane drenched in blood, but that's not the answer he's looking for. Richard's motto is never believe what you publish and never publish what you believe, and Catherine follows his motto to pen down his legacy. You must have guessed by now that this film is an adaptation of one of Stephen King's short stories of the same name. It is a vampire movie, yes, but it's also a take on the blood-sucking paparazzi and media that hound people for stories even when there are none, and exploit those involved for personal and selfish interests. The blatant hypocrisy, if you will, is that Stephen King and director Mark Pavia have bathed in the glory that media and paparazzi have heaped onto them. Despite this irony, the film provides jump scares, but also manages to make you laugh a few times. One of the major reasons this film made the cut on this list is its climax, which is unlike anything you would expect from a regular vampire film and will leave you both shocked and surprised. Cronos, 1993. In 1536, an alchemist built a device that could give eternal youth to its owner by creating a little wound, the downside being a resultant vampire's hunger for human blood. 4.5 centuries later, the device is found by an old religious antique dealer, Jesus Griss. When Griss accidentally activates the device, his body regains a youthful charm, but he develops an insatiable hunger for blood to the extent that he is ready to lick it off the floors. However, the device is sought after by a wealthy and dying tycoon, Dieter de la Guardia, who appoints his nephew Angel de la Guardia to retrieve it at all costs. If the machine is destroyed, its owner dies. Will Griss submit to his enemies? The film was written and directed by the legendary Academy Award-winning master of monsters Guillermo del Toro. On viewing Cronos, we realize that this is not just a film about horror, mythology, and religious imagery. It's a fine piece of artistic filmmaking that surpasses all boundaries of mainstream commercial films. The balance of horror and drama is perfectly pitched, complemented by fine performances from Federico Lupi as Jesus Griss and Ron Perlman as Angel de la Guardia. If you have even a passing knowledge of Del Toro, then you will know that he relies heavily on practical effects in his films, a strategy that has won several Oscars for his works. Cronos is a classical Del Toro film with visually rich sequences and a story that's equal parts dark and emotional. A few scenes where Griss speaks to his granddaughter bring out the film's empathetic substance, giving a brave variation of vampirism on screen as we know it. We definitely recommend this one if you're in the mood for an intelligent, stylish vampire flick which tells a grotesque gothic horror tale from a relatively modern angle. Sundown, The Vampire in Retreat, 1989. Under the leadership of the ancient and powerful elder Mardulak, a colony of vampires has sought to live a peaceful life and coexist with humans. They settle down in a small desert town of Purgatory, feeding off a machine that makes artificial human blood. When the machine stops functioning, the happy-go-lucky vampires call its engineer and designer. For some unknown reason, the engineer thinks it would be nice to bring along his wife and 2 young daughters on his business trip to Vampire City. Meanwhile, a vampire named Ethan Jefferson is rousing a group to bring about a revolution in the community, reverting to the old ways of killing humans and drinking fresh blood. To add to the conflict, a young descendant of Van Helsing is in town, aiming to butcher all vampires. Friends, we present to you an epic take on a vampire civil war. Horror comedies are fun, but they have a lot of ingredients in them, and even a great cook can spoil the broth. Nevertheless, Anthony Hickox did a great job in bringing to life this group of vampire cowboys who put sunscreen to save themselves from burning in the sun and find themselves in the middle of a civil war. We are really sad that they have stopped making these kinds of films, as they are not just humorous but actually quite sophisticated and intelligent. Bruce Campbell, who plays Robert Van Helsing, is a bumbling fool of a vampire hunter, and other characters exist for purely comic value. So while the film contains a lot of laughter, love, and lore, there's also an extremely uplifting moral at the end. It might not make you go "aww," but it'll leave you smiling when the credits roll. Mr. Vampire, 1985. Master Yam believes that the procedure of pulling his father out of his grave and burying him again will bring prosperity to his family. He hires a priest called Master Cow, whose expertise lies in the control of vampires and evil spirits. When Cow digs up the grave of Yam's father, he discovers that the corpse hasn't decomposed and has developed blue fingers like those common to vampires. He brings the undead corpse to his house for further research, but his incompetent students Choi and Sang somehow let the vampire out in the open. And this is no ordinary blood-sucking vampire moving through hops in its quest to claim victims. Naturally, the hopping vampire aims to kill everyone who is involved with digging its grave. If you have grown up watching or reading about Western vampires who dress in black leather clothes and have fanged teeth, then my friend, you are in for a real surprise in this film about a Chinese hopping vampire. Director Ricky Lau's Mr. Vampire is based on the Chinese fantasy folklore called Jiangxi, which has a rather macabre history. In ancient times, the transportation of corpses was conducted using long bamboo poles the bodies were tied to. Two men would lift either end of the pole on their shoulders, and while walking, the bamboo would flex, giving the impression that the corpses were hanging. This strange transportation process gave rise to the idea of hopping vampires, a concept which Lau exploited in his horror comedy. The film was so successful that he was commissioned to direct 4 sequels between 1986 and 1992. Mr. Vampire has basic visual effects and a decent soundtrack, but the dialogue is rich with humor and the film is painted generously with colors of horror. Watch it to believe it. Near Dark, 1987. On a late night, Caleb Colton gives a ride to a beautiful drifter, May. It's almost dawn before he asks her for a kiss, but instead she bites him and disappears. Later in the day, the sunlight burns Caleb and he realizes what the bite meant. Sarah and Loy Colton, Caleb's sister and his father, witness his abduction by a mysterious group. Caleb is introduced to May's vampire family, led by an age-old vampire named Jesse. Learning that he has been converted, Jesse allows Caleb to stick with the gang so that he could learn to hunt and survive. But Caleb is hesitant to kill and drink blood, so May kills for him and feeds him. The two fall in love, but Sarah and Loy show up. He will have to make a choice between his love of life and his beloved family. This film was a realistic and modern take on the famous blood-sucking creatures, at least for the 80s. Considered by few as a satire on rampant drug addiction, Near Dark manages to woo its viewer with a vague possibility of hope and healing. The film never mentions the word vampire, and the creatures don't turn into flying monsters like in the gothic stories you've heard of. Nevertheless, they maintain a believable attitude, and the credit goes to director Catherine Bigelow for this. Upon its release, the film didn't do very well at the box office, but garnered positive reviews from critics, and over the years, it has developed a die-hard cult following. Everything about the film is psychologically painful. Bigelow doesn't make her vampires kill innocent virgin girls or anything. The prey are probably as sinful as the predators. No Van Helsing comes to save the day with his crossbows in this realistically made film about vampires, love, family, righteousness, and of course, sexual desires. Night Watch, 2004. Since the beginning of time, superhumans called the Others have walked the earth alongside humans. The Others are divided. Different groups follow the forces of light and dark. Many centuries ago, these two sides met in a devastating battle, but both sides were equally strong with no clear winner in sight. The elders of the two sides call for a truce, and it was decided that the days would be governed by the side of light and nights would be governed by the forces of dark. However, the Elder of Light set up a police force named Night Watch to keep check on the evil vampires and to stop them from ravaging the city of Moscow. In present times, Anton has joined the Night Watch and seeks to avert a legendary prophecy. According to this prophecy, the most powerful Other will be born and will side with the forces of dark, ending the stalemate. Director Timur Bekmambetov intended this to be the first part of a 3-film trilogy. The reason why this film made the cut on this list is not only because of the stylish carnivorous vampires from a gothic setting portrayed fighting an eternal war. This one makes the list because Bekmambetov picked up a very American story of a supernatural fight between the good and the bad, or light and darkness in this case, and he embedded the story in Russian culture and theme. Right from the start, the film looks American but feels Russian, betraying a kind of experiment that has never before been undertaken in a vampire film. Moreover, the line between good and evil is blurred several times, and the viewer is often left with the choice and freedom to make their own judgments. We think this is one of the best vampire trilogies from any Russian director, and it came at a time when Stephenie Meyer's famous saga had not yet been adapted for screen. So enjoy!
No, not yet. You haven't even told me your name.
Judy Glassberg.
Rabid, 1977. Rose and her boyfriend Hart get involved in an accident. Hart suffers a fracture and a dislocated shoulder, and Rose's body gets burnt. The couple is taken to a hospital where Dr. Dan Kelloyd performs a new skin grafting surgery on Rose. The operation somehow changes her appetite and she begins to crave the taste of human blood. The people she feeds on get converted into zombies. She infects many and turns them into zombies, only to flee to her friend Mindy in Montreal while Hart is looking for her. David Cronenberg became the legend he is after a few films, but even in his early efforts like Rabid, he shows his knack for gruesome but sophisticated body horror, which will creep you out and even make you feel nauseated. A unique take on vampirism and zombification, this film just mixes the two. Unlike other flicks of the period, Cronenberg uses science as the cause of zombification instead of bloodthirsty fang vampires. It is also noteworthy that Rose doesn't attack from her mouth. She sucks the blood from a newly developed orifice under her armpit, which is equipped with a red stinger-like organ. It is slightly disappointing that all these exciting concepts and novelties were not developed as much as they could have been. Most of them serve a purpose in the film, but are otherwise left underdeveloped. Nevertheless, this is still a visual masterpiece that can horrify any layman and quench a gorehound's thirst for the nasty and grotesque. Martin, 1978. Marty looks like a 20-something-year-old young man, but he claims to be 84 years old and that he's a vampire. He heavily sedates his victims and slices their bodies to drink their blood. Somehow, he goes to live in a small Pennsylvania town with his granduncle Tate Kuda and cousin Christina. Tate is apprehensive of Martin and refers to him as the ancient vampire Nosferatu, while his cousin promises to save his soul. The lonely Martin finds love in a local housewife, and his urge to drink blood is reduced, but soon his withdrawal symptoms kick in and he goes on a rampage. What lies ahead is anybody's guess. George A. Romero was truly an expert at romanticizing the horror genre and using it as a social commentary, but a frightful one. This film is not just horrifying and frightening, but also has a suspense looming throughout, because it is never revealed if Martin really is a vampire or if his actions are the result of a mental illness. While the audience struggles to figure out Martin's history and evolution, Romero throws in captivating action and elements of fear to keep the film true to the horror genre. The titular character is a peculiar vampire who needs needles and razor blades to quench his bloodlust. We don't remember Count Dracula doing such things. Never did Van Helsing have to fight such obnoxious vampires. And that, folks, is the beauty of this highly acclaimed film. Even 4 decades on from its release, the film still has all the ingredients necessary to scare, traumatize, and make viewers question reality and myth. The idea that the most logical explanation is that Martin is a blood-sucking serial killer is pretty unsettling.
Jesus, son.
Let Me In, 2010. Owen is a sensitive, unhappy, and bullied 12-year-old boy who lives in Los Alamos, New Mexico with his mother. To his surprise and delight, he sees an old man, Thomas, and his daughter Abby moving into a property as his neighbors. The girl is captivatingly beautiful, and the two soon start speaking through Morse code. However, she is not what she seems. Abby is an ancient vampiress who lives on blood brought to her by Thomas, who was once her boyfriend. When Thomas gets caught by the police, Abby resorts to killing to satiate her hunger. Abby reveals her true identity to Owen, and he is scared, but at the same time, he loves her. Let Me See is an English remake of the Swedish romance horror film Let the Right One In. It's an unusual fairy tale between a boy and a vampiress. The elements of horror and fear are captivating, and at the same time, the chemistry between the two leads played by Cody Smith-McPhee and Chloe Grace Moritz is engaging. It's a simple story of young love that's both dark and sweet. The film is remade, there's a high chance that it won't please the audience nor critics, simply because it exists under the dangling sword of comparison. However, director Matt Reeves was efficient enough to make improvements in plot and action. Cody and Chloe add to the quality of the film. Their naive innocence and adolescent charm bewitches the audience, who hope for a happy ending. But should that happen, Owen would end up like Thomas, a psychologically unsettling thought. This unique take on vampirism ultimately asks a simple question. In love, how far is far enough?
Please give me another chance.
Number 12, Thirst, 1979. Kate Davis's life is turned upside down when she is abducted by a group of shady individuals who claim to be vampires and think she's a direct descendant of Elizabeth Bathory. Bathory was a 16th century countess known to the world as one of the first serial killers. She sent more than 100 young girls to the afterlife through acts of sadism. The group calls itself the Brotherhood and takes Kate to a farm where they harvest human blood from bodies and feed on what they extract in order to retain their youth and vigor. Kate is forced to wear metallic fang dentures and is brainwashed into drinking blood despite her resistance. For how long can Kate fight her building urges? We've grown up watching vampire flicks. In almost all of them, vampires are known to kill, and some unlucky or motivated folks try to put an end to this ongoing massacre. There's always an abundance of blood, and usually some high-octane fight and horror sequences thrown in for some good measure. However, how many films have you seen that explore how a vampire is formed? This unusual and horrendous transformation from a human being to a bloodthirsty beast must be physically and psychologically tormenting. Well, Thirst shares that untold story. Chantal Conturi as Kate Davis has given a phenomenal performance, and her expressions brilliantly exhibit the trauma she's going through. Having said that, the film has its share of flaws, but as a genre-blending film with elements of science fiction and horror, it emerges as an exciting watch for movie lovers in general and an essential one for horror fans. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
Hey!